That was it. I'm glad I did, if you want to know the truth. And by the way, I never went to the island, and Bill Clinton went there supposedly 28 times. I never went to the island, but Larry Summers, I hear, went there. He was the head of Harvard. And many other people that are very big people. Nobody ever talks about them. I never had the privilege of going to his island. And I did turn it down, but a lot of people in Palm Beach were invited to his island. In one of my very good moments, I turned it down. I didn't want to go to his island.
Okay, guys, that was your moment of Zen video before the horrors begin. Not saying that Epstein's island isn't that. I just wanted to point out that saying or characterizing going to Epstein's island as a privilege is a very conspicuous word choice. But anyways, we all know that plays into foreign policy, but it's not the summation of U.S. foreign policy. It would still happen even if Jeffrey Epstein wasn't what most of us suspect him to have been. Yeah, and just so you guys know, as everyone's still filtering into the lies. Into the live. That was from a meeting in the UK with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. And that was just the social media cutting I took from one of my buddies who runs an account that posts all of like Trump's antics. If you zoom out, he was sitting right next to Keir Starmer while saying that. And Keir Starmer's just like, yeah. Anyways, all right, guys, Gaza, we're going to talk about it. But I got a little bit of rant prepared for you. I wrote it out because I think we all need to hear it, because as the famine escalates in Gaza, the "I told you so" crowd, should have voted for Harris crowd, is out back in force. Okay. And I just have a message for any of your friends or family members that you want to send this intro to. And maybe your thoughts echo mine, but it starts a little something like this. Did you know that resistance liberals are big mad at you right now for voting against genocide, or at least not voting for genocide when they did vote for genocide? And they only did vote for genocide because it would have been easier to organize against genocide under Harris, who was pro-genocide. Yeah. Okay. And they know about organizing. You know, they've organized so many Sex and the City brunches. We just wish they had organized themselves into learning about things like dialectical materialism, which takes a lot of work, and you can't be pounding them mimosas while doing it, or the function of capitalism into imperialism, into colonialism, and how that is always, or this is always going to happen. I know that Trump is a real estate developer who wants to develop Gaza, and so is Steve Witkoff, his Middle East envoy. But isn't it also crazy how Kamala's first public speaking event after her failed election bid was at the Australian Real Estate Conference? Isn't that insane? Isn't it also crazy to see history as a series of dizzyingly unrelated events? Like, what did the Bengal famine during the Second World War have to do with the earlier Irish potato famine? What? What does manifest destiny have to do with Zionism? These are all separate things that exist in a vacuum and have nothing to do with capitalism or our economic system or the American empire. And the entire shebang can absolutely be reformed under the power structures of the bourgeoisie and ruling elite, the same people who want to develop Gaza, both Trump and Harris as landlord friends, through responsible social democratic reforms. It's totally going to work, guys. And of course, they're like, oh, so what's like the plan of you radical leftists? Do you want to have a plan behind armed revolution? Where's your Vanguard party? Bro, just start by going to an anti-ICE or pro-Palestine action. Hell, go dump some stuff off from your from your pantry at an anarchist food drive. Like, I mean, God forbid you actually read a book that will answer your questions instead of posting dumbassery in my comment sections, but you won't. Because deep down, you know, in your twisted, blackened little heart of hearts, that AOC and Bernie Sanders will save you. Anyways, My name is Greg Stoker, and I'm the host of this little live stream that you may have accidentally stumbled onto. And I don't usually rant, but I got pissed off today because my comment section was flooded by idiots. And yes, state of play twice a week on Mint Press News. It's usually analysis based and not rant based. This is going to be some rant based stuff today. But this one is going to get into some very basic theory that explains why all this is happening under Trump, under Harris, that might help your struggling liberal friends understand what's going on in Gaza behind the humanitarian catastrophe. That was always going to happen, just like Manifest Destiny was always going to happen, just like the Bengal famine was always going to happen. These things exist in a historical context, and we still exist in that same historical context. You may think that the age of colonialism and all these horrible things, Leopold's Belgian Congo, existed in the history books, but I think we've seen over the past almost 2 years that that is not true at all. Google Gaza 2035 for the ultimate plan here while I do this Patreon plug. Gaza 2035 project. All right. Well, Mint Press News is a small independent newsroom with no corporate sponsors, been demonetized for years after being targeted by Google Owl. You can also look that up. It was a preemptive, like, state military defense contractor surveillance platform. Anyways, so we're on Patreon. If you want to support our efforts, we also have news articles, op-eds, investigations. You can go to the website or the Patreon linked in the description. And if you're picking up what you're putting down and you have any spare cash in this late stage capitalist dystopia, we would love it if you help us out. And if not, because times are tough, we're just glad you're here. So if you can like, share, subscribe, spread the word. Also, if you don't like YouTube, we are on all audio streaming platforms for these episodes. So that's an option if you're like an audio person. So, which I am. I never watch anything on YouTube. I always just listen to it in the background. So I miss some of the graphics, but I don't know. I have to multitask, especially as the world disintegrates. But anyways, glad you're here. Let's get into it. So just for some context for the unfolding humanitarian catastrophe, President Donald Trump today, and we have some B-roll that we're going to play right now just to really drive this home, told reporters today in Turnberry, Scotland, during his meeting with British Prime Minister. Actually, I guess I need to find that B-roll, or someone can bring it up maybe. So today in Turnberry, Scotland, during his meeting with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, that, quote, "We're going to set up food centers, and we're going to do it in conjunction with some very good people. We're going to supply funds. We just took trillions of dollars. We assume this trillions is dubiously coming from the EU trade deal that EU leaders agreed to on this weekend. More on that later. Yeah, we assume that the trillions of dollars that he's talking about come from the savings that he thinks he's going to get from the EU trade deal, where we're hitting them or we're hitting ourselves with a 15% tariffs against EU products, and then the EU has their own concessions as well. But yes, anyways, he says we got a lot of money. We're going to spend a little money on some food, and other nations are joining us. So we're going to set up food centers, and where the people can walk in and no boundaries. We're not going to have fences. This is one of the rants he went on. Trump, who has largely blamed the Hamas for the delay in distributing aid to civilians in Gaza, acknowledged Israel has a lot of responsibility for limiting aid in the region, but again, called for Hamas to release the hostages still held in Gaza to ease negotiations. And I just want to point out, as I try to bring one of these things up, I guess they're not working. What a weird day for technical issues. Oh, okay, there we go. Yeah, so these are some of the horrendous scenes we're looking at. Where was I? Sorry, guys. Yeah, the basic crux of this is when it comes to the negotiations, it's bad faith, right? So the negotiations are between the U.S. and Israel and then Hamas is approached through Qatari mediums. So they're not actually part of the deal. So they can't accept it because they're actually not part of the negotiations. We should just contextualize that, because I take some clips from like neoliberal reporting and basically use that for context. So Trump broke with Netanyahu's weekend assertion that there is no starvation in Gaza, that it's a real starvation. Sorry, he said real starvation stuff. I see it, and you can't fake that, so we're going to be even more involved. Trump also said aid centers will be built, and I wanted to bring this up. Be advised, this is Monday's imperial propaganda. This is Biden's aid port 2.0. Okay, Trump, even if he actually built these aid centers that he just randomly brought up, is only playing for time until the outrage over this demonstrable famine, even though they're not technically calling it a famine yet, has died down. The aid centers might be built. Some airdrops from Jordan might happen, and they did happen while I was writing the show notes. And then, of course, reporters weren't allowed to actually film out of the aircraft. They had journalists inside the aircraft, but they weren't able to film once the cargo door opened, because the Israeli military said they don't want anyone filming the devastation of Gaza. They didn't say devastation, but we know why they went through that post-flight briefing. So airdrops might happen, but no food, no substantive food to support the population is ever going to get in. What did the aid port do last spring under the Biden administration? Cost a lot of money, delivered a negligible amount of aid via the World Central Kitchen, which hastily halted operations after the IDF deliberately targeted its convoy, served as a propaganda anchor for Israel to continue the ethnic cleansing of Gaza, and potentially served, though there is no direct evidence for this, as an exfiltration point for the IDF and Shin Bet forces after the Nusayrat massacre, which killed at least 276 Palestinians and injured pretty much 700. So if these aid centers are built, they will serve a similar function. Again, this is all about playing for time and giving a shred of political cover to Israel. While it is delusional to think that public opinion at home and abroad will improve with regards to Israel's genocide, that's U.S. foreign policy for you. So prepare yourself for the next distraction. Epstein was actually a foreign intelligence asset for Russia or China, according to former CIA Mike Baker on last week's Joe Rogan podcast. Yeah, I don't listen to Joe Rogan. Some of my friends sent me the clip from it. Yeah, he had this ex-CIA guy on. Mike Baker is now a political commentator on to talk about how the Epstein files might actually be connected with Russia or China. So today, Trump just told the press, actually, that President Putin has 10 to 12 days to institute a ceasefire with Ukraine. The implication here being that the U.S. will begin to supply long-range offensive weapons. If they get real desperate, they might tease aliens and Project Blue Book, because Gaza must be developed. As an imperial president, he has a fiduciary responsibility to do so. It is called capitalism. It is not because of the Epstein files or Zog, Zionist occupied government neo-Nazi conspiracies. It's because this is how the system works, how it's always worked. Does Israel exert more influence as a colonial entity upon the imperial core than, what we saw in the 19th century? Yeah, but AIPAC's not the only interest at play here. So, and we're going to get into that. So, which is why, and it's the whole system. So it's why the Department of Homeland Security is posting manifest destiny propaganda, and why the U.S., a country founded on the erasure of entire peoples, is seemingly fine with a genocide in Palestine, even if it's starting to make Hakeem Jeffries, leader of the House Democratic Caucus, a bit squeamish. And it's why pseudo-progressive candidates like Bernie Sanders and AOC are completely silent right now. Even Hakeem Jeffries, Cory Booker, Richie Torres, all of these massive AIPAC beneficiaries are having to say at least something. But yeah, where are the comments from the actual people who are presidential and political hopefuls? Even because look, if they attack the system, they will assail their own privilege. and access to political power. Even outside of the erratic and pathologically lying nature of Donald Trump, this is why aid will not continue in any significant way. This is America, and it's also Canada, and all the Western colonial client nations of the U.S. empire. Check out this world salad. And to demonstrate this, we know, let's just yeah. So to demonstrate this, let's check out this world salad about human rights by Canadian Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand at the UN meeting on, quote, the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution. We can't listen to the whole thing because it's too insufferable, but here we go.
We are here today because this moment demands political courage and resolve. And we must stand together and choose a different path, one that leads toward a sustainable and a just solution. And political agreements alone are not enough. We must also address the narratives shaping identity, perception, and legitimacy, as these lie at the heart of the conflict. As G7 president, Canada is engaging closely with regional partners, and the message is clear. The region must be defined by peace, by stability, and by dignity for all.
These are Western values. It seems increasingly like Western values are things you just say and then completely ignore. Crazy idea, huh?
Guided by this understanding, Canada, alongside Qatar and Mexico, is co-leading this Narrative for Peace working group.
Narrative for Peace.
Aimed at building an inclusive framework grounded in dignity and coexistence. Peace is not only about borders and agreements. It is also about shared stories and understanding that humanize all sides and foster trust. Canada is committed to initiatives that amplify voices of peace, promote understanding, and reject division. We support local mediation and peace-building efforts, empower youth and women leaders, and champion press freedom and inclusive dialogue.
More women fighter bomber pilots. Kumbaya, my lord. Kumbaya. I don't know how else to explain what is happening without talking about theory for like 10 minutes, something I've never done before, but there's a reason we called the annihilation of Gaza back in October 2023, and everyone was pissed at us for it. Why is this happening? It's happening for money. So the rich can extract everything they can from the working class at home, and when that is not enough, they have to look elsewhere. This is where imperialism and colonialism come in. Michael Parenti, an important left-wing political scientist, asserted that America's biggest addiction is not alcohol or heroin or gambling, it's greed. The ruling class throughout history has always wanted the best land, the best herds, the finest luxury goods. This existed under primitive headman societies, and it existed under the iniquities of feudalism and the divine right of kings. The kings and the aristocracy used this millennia-old idea to take what they wanted, up to a point where the peasants would revolt, and then they'd walk it back a bit. And then there have been other theories for governance, like Aristotle's political cycle, which gets a lot of play in Western liberal education, but is utterly useless. Aristotle has classified 6 forms of states, and it believes that these keep revolving in a cyclical order. The cycle begins with monarchy, which soon gets perverted into tyranny, which then is replaced by aristocracy, the rule of the few and the wise, able people. And aristocracy soon gets perverted into oligarchy, the rule of the rich, to be replaced by the rule of the people, polity. Polity then gets perverted in democracy, and then mob rule, and then democracy in the final term gets replaced by monarchy, and the cycle begins all over again. This is what I was taught during like my classical education on the like neoliberal East Coast. This has been one of the most criticized theories of Aristotle's, and for good reason. And it may have sounded good back during the Athenian Golden Age, watching the cycles of revolution of ancient Greek city states, but it really doesn't answer the question why the three noble forms of government, which are called monarchy, aristocracy, and polity, uh, devolve always into absolute shit. And it definitely doesn't answer why capitalism, the response to feudalism, sucks so bad and why governments under the capitalist system do such horrible things. To define terms, capitalism is an economic system where private individuals or businesses own and control the means of production, the factories, the land, and where goods and services are produced for profit in a free market. It is characterized by competition, private property, and limited government intervention in free market economics. A core fundamental is that the primary goal of business is to try to generate profit. At the heart of the entire system is profit motive. When you're looking at Gaza, it's profit motive. When you're looking at the annexation of the West Bank, profit motive. When you are looking at Taiwan, Ukraine, that's at the heart of it. If you consider yourself on the political left, that fundamentally means you oppose this system. Liberals and Democrats do not. That is why they are. That's why, they are center-right party at best, and why all their foreign policy decisions closely align with Republicans. Why the Dems love sending arms to Ukraine, which Trump opposed on the campaign trail, but now he's all about it. Right? So you cannot understand what's going on with at least putting out a little effort to understand a Marxist concept, which serves as a basis for socialism, to include a lot of anarchist thinkers as well, dialectic materialism. It takes effort to internalize this concept, so it's not going to happen here. But the basics are dialectics are kind of like derived from Hegel, like Hegelian philosophy, which views the world as a process of change driven by contradictions and conflicts. And this is often summarized as change, conflict, and development, right? And materialism, in this context, emphasizes the primacy of the material world over ideas or consciousness. The noble idea of liberalism, for example, always just collapses into rich people wanting more shit. We want equity and, liberty for all men, all mankind, but actually in the end we just want more shit. So it asserts that material conditions, particularly economic structures, are the foundation for social and cultural development. Dialectical materialism specifically applies this materialist view to the dialectical process of contradictions, change, and conflict, suggesting that material forces and their interactions are the primary drivers of change in this world. Okay, that's a lot. Takes a long time to internalize, but this is going to get into the easier section about why this is happening. Check it out on your old chime. Also, check out the tendency for the rate of profit to fall. It's a crisis theory of political economy, and according to which the rate of profit, the ratio of the profit to the amount invested in capital, decreases over time. Essentially, when profits fall or decline in rates of their expansion within a limited economic space, i.e., a country's domestic economy, it's time to expand your horizons. Imperialism and colonialism. That's what Israel is. Okay? It is our colony and an extension of the American empire to wage adventurous wars and destabilizations operations and to do our dirty work for us in the region and carve up the Middle East into vassal states that will allow Western capitalists to exploit their countries and resources. And the idea that colonialism is the highest stage of imperialism is a concept popularized by thinkers like Lenin and Kwame, Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah. He was a Ghanaian academic who wrote an extension of Lenin's book, and the U.S. actually sanctioned Ghana over the book itself. So, anyways, Lenin, in his work Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, argued that imperialism driven by capitalist monopolies and the export of finance capital necessitates colonialism for its survival and expansion. Nkrumah, in his book Neocolonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism, extended this idea, arguing that neocolonialism, a more subtle form of domination, is the current manifestation of imperialism in a post-colonial world. So, guys, imperialism, colonialism. Imperialism, boilerplate, is the policy of extending a nation's power and influence through diplomacy or military force, often involving the acquisition of colonies. Colonialism is the policy or practice of acquiring full or partial political control over another country, occupying it with settlers and exploiting it economically. So what it looks like for most settler colonies, be it the United States or Israel or Australia is one of the worst. They declare, because they don't want to have to admit that they, created their country off genocide and settler colonialism, they declare terra nullius, a land with no people, a land of nothing. This is why one of the big Zionist talking points was, a land without a people for a people without a land. And, the main thrust of this argument was that, when capitalism reaches a high stage, there's a monopoly, concentration of economic power in the hands of a few large corporations who have a fiduciary responsibility and a mandate to expand into other places. BlackRock has a lot of reconstruction rights in Ukraine. They're also getting involved, and so are a lot of other hedge funds in Gaza 2035 project and other redevelopment plans for the Strip. And then the finance capital is the merging of industrial and banking capital, creating financial oligarchies. And yeah, basically, there's an argument to me that these factors necessitate colonialism to secure resources, markets, and investment opportunities for capitalist powers that must grow. And then, well, we all know what neocolonialism is. We talk about the IMF and we talk about the World Bank and NATO all the time, which is the indirect control of a developing country by a former colonial power or nation, often through economic and political influence rather than direct military rule. So what are the characteristics of it? Economic dependence. Developing countries remain reliant on other forms of colonial power for trade, investment, and aid. A lot of Sahel countries like Burkina Faso are rejecting the economic dependence. Another characteristic is political instability. Former colonial powers can manipulate political systems to maintain their influence. This generally looks like, during the colonial era, the French in Syria propped up the Alawais to be the dominant political force from which political authority flowed. And then in Ceylon, the British colony of Sri Lanka, the British put the Tamils in power over the Buddhists. And it ended in the Tamil Tigers and the genocide in Sri Lanka, which Israel was absolutely complicit in the 90s, 2000s. And then, of course, we're seeing what's happening with the Alawais in Syria now that they've fallen out of power when they were colonially installed. And so, and then there's cultural influence. Dominant cultures can perpetuate colonial mentalities and values. Of course they do. And so neocolonialism is even more insidious than colonialism because it operates under the guise of independence, making it harder to identify and resist. But the reason Israel is so horrifying because it isn't a global South neo-colony. It is an actual white supremacist settler colony that should exist only in a history book, and its entire existence is a horrifying vindication of a vast amount of left-wing political and economic theory. That's it. Like, lecture over. A lot of capitalists want to turn Gaza into a new Dubai for a lot of reasons, not just because of real estate ventures, because of the IMEC corridor, India, Mumbai, across Saudi Arabia, going through the Transjordan into the ports in Haifa, into Europe. We've talked about that before. It's basically a challenge to a certain section of the BRICS, a global infrastructure plan. The Middle East has to be dominated because it's the most strategically significant location, one of the most in the world. It sits at the axis of 3 different continents. It's rich in minerals. and it possesses now the Suez Canal. And so there's a lot of interest going in there. And then, of course, we want to see an investment uh, in the Gulf states and a normalization with Israel to not only secure the region, but to create a kind of AI tech hub, a challenge of tech infrastructure to challenge China and other BRICS nations, because we're losing the race badly, and then Israel can help out with that. They're one of our biggest tech sectors. Normalization would be important for AI-driven competition against China. It's not going to work, but that's another factor. Then, of course, Turkey's kind of breaking out, being its own regional player. And there's something to be said for a transnational capitalist elite or transnational security elite that exists outside of just straight up Western hegemony. I mean, you can make various arguments on that. But one thing to be aware of is that no matter how this Israel thing works out, even if Harris was president, even if Trump was president, is that if they lose here against the resistance in Gaza, it will be intensely damaging to Western hegemony going forward. Same thing in Ukraine. So one of the things we have to actually bear in mind is a lot of people in not only the Israeli government, but in the American government see a military solution as still the only viable option to end this thing. And there is no military solution to end this thing. As I said since the beginning, if you want to defeat the resistance in Gaza, you'll have to kill everybody. And we talked the last episode about how voluntary or enforced migration isn't something that's really viable politically. They may try to just force it through military intervention, like literally militarily dumping people off in random places. That would be insane. But what we're looking at right now, and because their military option, even though it's completely delusional, and it will turn Israel into a pariah state, is that they're having to play for time. That's what they're doing. And of course, when we bring in Harris and the Democrats, they do things less egregiously than the Republicans. You can't say that they're the same party. I mean, they have the same ultimate goals. They expand the police, national security state. They serve the professional managerial class and the oligarchs as well. But so it would be better manner because, Obama made this bombing of seven Muslim countries because he was so well spoken and articulate. Seven Muslim countries. What else did he do? Expanded ICE, solidified the national security state beyond the Patriot Act. But he made that go down so damn smooth. And the exact same thing would be happening. It would be less egregious. There'd be like more calls from aid from the president, where Harris would be like, "It just breaks my heart, where I've been pressuring Benjamin Netanyahu, and then we're just all going to blame it on Netanyahu." And then they would have leaks from the White House, like this is what Harris really said behind closed doors, and Axios News would report it, and they would be like, "Oh yeah, real change is coming." No, it would look a little bit different under the Harris administration, but this exact situation would still be happening. Actually, you know what? Under Harris administration, let's be honest, the original ceasefire that happened when Trump was inaugurated wouldn't even have happened. So at least they got some relief that way. But yeah, man, you guys just haven't been paying attention. If you think anything would be different, I was in the military in special operations under Obama, and Obama's policies were way more violent than Bush's were, who started the whole damn war, or the invasion of Afghanistan and the unwarranted invasion of Iraq. I'm not saying that Afghanistan wasn't, but yeah, it's the same thing. And the violence that we do overseas always comes back home. So this is a forever war here in Gaza. We got one in Ukraine, and the one in Afghanistan that we did is actually just come home via ICE. And of course, would the Democrats have expanded ICE like the Republicans have? Absolutely not. But that budget was still going up. This is all how it works. We are in collapse into fascism, the merging of the corporate and governmental power. subservient mostly to corporate power, you know. So I don't know what to tell you guys if you're still hanging on to that, but yeah, that was on my little primer. It was probably a little too wordy. I could have like refined it a little bit better and made it more engaging for people who already aren't too familiar with this stuff. I don't know. I just kind of threw it together, but let's actually look at some reporting going back to Gaza. But just before we continue into our next segment, there was a great video on social media about all of this.
Leftist is to be right, but too early, and to be continuously punished for being right too early. As early as October 8th, leftists were saying Israel has used starvation as a weapon of war against Gaza, and it is going to exponentially increase that use of starvation as a weapon of war. And now you have liberals walking around seemingly dumbfounded that their ally Israel is using starvation as a weapon of war. Oh my god, how crazy is it that a US ally and settler colony could commit war crimes? It's not like we have any historical parallels that we could turn to that would make analyzing this situation even a little bit easier. The reason liberals do this is because they genuinely have no way of analyzing history. To them, history is just a series of unconnected events. They cannot analyze patterns and extrapolate truths. Their ideology prevents them from having this skill, which is why they fall for this stuff every single time. They are doomed to eternally be Charlie, kicking the ball right as Lucy yanks it away. But this lack of historical analysis is a feature and not a bug, because if liberals could analyze patterns and predict what can happen next, then they would have to implement some sort of preventative measures for atrocities rather than being purely reactionary, which is what liberalism is. All liberals know how to do when bad things happen is turn around and get angry at the people who said that those bad things were going to happen, because they do not have the power of foresight.
Yeah, that was a little thing about that. Yeah, I saw on the comments being like, you know, okay, I hear all that. I already knew that kind of stuff, but the United States is still ZOG. And ZOG means Zionist occupied government. And it's a term begun by white supremacists within the United States as a response. Well, I mean, they did catch on first to, in the context of a lot of people who weren't like involved in like what Zionism really was. We're kind of some of the first people to remark on the fact that Israel has a lot of influence on the United States. But there's a lot of things that prove that the United States has the same tendencies, completely separate from Israel. You know, we are expressing coloniality and imperial wars on our own soil. You know, we are reinforcing Taiwan for a multi-decade shift towards China, fortifying it in what Marco Rubio calls the porcupine strategy. That has no bearing on Israeli politics, the isolation of China. And there's countless other things going on in Africa. Sudan's not a good, and the Congo are not good instances of that because, of course, Israel's heavily embedded in Sudan and the Congo as well. Yeah, so again, Taiwan doesn't need its own lobby. Ukraine will get unconditional support within certain parameters without its own lobby. Yeah, so I don't know. I just fundamentally disagree with the ZOG argument because it doesn't make sense for the entirety of the U.S. system. So to pick and choose kind of seems disingenuous from my perspective as well. Yeah, so I mean, it just encompasses a tiny fraction of, you know, what we're looking at. And if you look at the whole Zog theory, it's like, okay, we've used Israel all across the world to do our dirty work, from Guatemala, from overthrowing communists or like to fighting the Sandinistas to, you know, helping us organize death squads in, you know, Guatemala, stuff like that. And, you know, they were intermediary to sell arms to Iran during the Contra because we didn't want Iran to like completely caved to Saddam during the war because they were virulently, especially at the time, super anti-communist because communists were like USSR wanted Persia. They were like no religion. Well, that's not entirely true, but yeah. So that's why we have always used them as an intermediary. And again, it only explains a fraction of U.S. Foreign policy. You know, yeah. So someone says Ukraine is not a good example. Okay, Ukraine is literally the Khazar nomad steppe land. Oh, we're not doing Khazar theory. Okay, we're getting back to Gaza because we're getting into some not chill territory. But here we go. Basically, here's the state of play continuing on in Gaza. The humanitarian situation is at its worst point since ever, right? With 122 Palestinians dying of starvation in recent weeks, according to the health ministry. The Palestinian death toll since the war stands at nearly 60,000, according to Axios News. We know that to be way higher than that. There's a reason why the Office of Director of National Intelligence and why Trump says there's 1.8 million, sometimes 1.9 million people in Gaza. Well, okay, cool. You guys keep misspeaking. Where do the other, 0.4 million, 0.3 million go? So, I mean, a lot of people are unaccounted for and buried in the rubble. But even, these Zionist articles, even in these Axios News, written by, let me see, let's pull it up, Barak Ravid. Hang on. I got to remove this other media. Yeah, it says, nearly all Western leaders have been urging Israel with increasing desperation. They're not desperate. They're just trying to cover their ass to stop the fighting and allow in more aid by making Trump's finish the job message all the more jarring by contrast. The humanitarian catastrophe that we are witnessing in Gaza must end now. France, Germany, and the UK said in a joint statement Friday. Withholding essential humanitarian assistance to the civilian population is unacceptable. Now, of course, France, Germany, and the UK have been running political cover and giving unlimited support to Israel up until now because it's completely unavoidable what's happening. So the bottom line is Israel and the U.S. are together in a diplomatic island, seen by many of their allies as jointly responsible for the dire situation. At least some in the administration acknowledge privately that their strategy hasn't worked, but they hadn't yet decided whether or how to change it. They are not going to change it. They are currently in a loop playing for time. And now it's getting worse because for the first time, Israeli human rights groups say Israel is committing genocide in Gaza and calls for international intervention. Of course, most Israelis hate B'Tselem and positions for human rights. But this is the first time any Israeli human rights group of any significant clout has described this as a genocide. Now, I would like to point out one thing that a lot of people don't really consider. If hypothetically, and I've said from the beginning, I don't think it's going to work. I haven't heard a single explanation how genocide could be effectuated and Israel still exists. But of course, we're living in unprecedented times. I would just like to point out that if they delete a significant portion of their population, both in Gaza, in the West Bank, and in Israel proper itself, because after Gaza and the West Bank, they're coming for Palestinian or Arab Israelis who are not Jewish. What exactly would the state look like? Would people stay there? Would they still have an economy? Would people go to vacation in Israel ever again? How would the state survive? I haven't heard an explanation for how that would happen. And of course, there's no long-term thinking here. Netanyahu, who is in control of the government, wants to take the summer to solidify his political position in order to be unassailable for his Supreme Court charges. Then he will actually try, along with his in an effort to keep Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and the far-right power base on his side, he will attempt in some way this voluntary migration scheme. What will happen to Israel after that? Say Gaza is deleted. The tourist industry is gone. Pariah state. People will move back. At least a lot of the liberal Zionists in Tel Aviv, small businesses and foreign investment. I don't know. We have a precedent for South Africa, and now this is something everybody knows about. So their economy is already in shreds. We've seen Intel pull out of a huge deal. Of course, NVIDIA's thinking about investing a lot of their infrastructure in Israel. I think if NVIDIA pulls out of their deal, we know how this is going. So, yeah. How does it continue? I think like when we look at this darkest perspective, this is the darkest hour of the war so far. What is the end game? No policymaker has articulated an end game or a viable end game beyond genocide. But how does the state exist? Israel is a country with no strategic depth. Economy, and that's just not militarily. The strategic depth they have is because we can give them bombs and do mass logistical Roman Empire style logistical miracles to give them shit. But beyond that, there's a small, tiny country, no standoff between their industrial centers and the front lines. Not a huge economy, especially when you're taking out hundreds of thousands of reservists out of the workforce and then employing them in a multi-year war of attrition. Their military industrial complex is deeply embedded with ours. But again, we have to keep in mind, in some revolutionary optimism here, how did it end in Vietnam for the empire? How did the global war on terror end? The U.S. is great at causing destruction, destroying governments, annihilating militaries, and then what? Fighting forever war counterinsurgencies that make a lot of rich people a lot of money until it becomes politically and economically unviable, and then they pull out. And then Israelis themselves, there's also the cultural depth. Their one thing was, I'm Israeli. I have like 3 different passports, and like I travel the world, and I'm rich, and my producer's accidentally trying to come on. So I think, we don't know how this is going to end. We just know that they're playing for time. This would happen under Harris, probably a little bit less egregiously. I don't actually know. She's actually a bigger Iran hawk than Trump. But just remember, these best laid plans by these policymakers, these people are so smart and control all the military. When has it worked out? And what would Israel look like without a Palestinian population? How does it survive? If someone could give me like a working theory, I'd be like, okay, it's possible. But like right now, I don't know. Israel's kind of like that. What's the cartoon? Coyote runs off a cliff, keeps running and running and running, and he doesn't fall until he actually looks down. The second they look down, they're done. So, anyways, sorry. Woo! Unconventional episode. Let's get into some questions. All right. Someone's like, Sanders is a fascist. He's a liberal Zionist. I was at the No Kings protest in D.C., and someone was like, one of the organizers was like, Republicans are fascists. And I was like, I believe that the Dems are too. He's like, no, Dems are like a neoliberal party of war. And then I was like, okay, but they don't, like every time the fascists do something, they feign incompetence. Hakeem Jeffries, they have all the leverage. There's nothing we can do. Okay, cool. So you're going to be like every other liberal party from the 1930s who would be like, they're super violent and they control everything. What can we do? So if you like don't resist fascists and you're elected to do that, and you move further to the right yourself, and you coddle them and you make excuses for them, and you bungle the political gold mine that was this Epstein case. I don't know. Seems like liberalism has failed. You're either a fascist or a socialist now. So I don't disagree. I think we can be very disciplined in our characterization of these people. So let's see what we got. It's almost like the richest and the most powerful people on the planet all know each other. I mean, I think the Epstein case kind of like really demonstrates that, right? The most wealthy business families in the world, whether they're from the United States or France or the UK or India or China. Well, China's a little bit more complicated, but yeah, they all know each other. They all have some sort of business, even if they don't like each other. But what else we got? Economy of genocide. Still, you still vote for red or blue as an imperial example of Einstein's definition of insanity. Hopium doth butter no parsnips. Yeah. Okay, so you can't know what your protests accomplished because nobody will ever say they acted differently because of public pressure. The Dems did nothing for 8 years, bro. Underhill, don't go through customs with that profile picture. I hear they're trying to interrogate people for JD Vance memes right now. This is actually really stupid of them because even though Mike Huckabee, the evangelical, right now I pulled up, Israel Zionism has just bombed a Christian church in Gaza, Palestine land. My partner, her grandmother actually just brought up Gaza because of this. Like even through her circles, she heard that Israel's doing this. Alienating the Christian right is probably not the move to make, but they're so rapidly unhinged in their quest for complete domination and control of the land, even though they're moving way too fast. I don't know. It's absolutely insane. But the thing you have to understand is these Christians, they can bomb, kill as many Palestinian Christians as they want. They can destroy literally every church in the Holy Land except the ones they need for the apocalypse. And a lot of these evangelicals will toe the line. A lot of MAGA will toe the line. When Trump said, I could execute, like before he was elected for his first term, I could shoot someone in the head in Times Square and these people would still vote for me. Well, apparently you could be a pedo in Times Square and these people will still vote for him. So, yeah, if he supports Israel, they're going to. So, yeah, that's just another one of their crimes. All eyes on the Freedom Flotilla. Okay, we should hear soon. I'm not in contact with their control team or command team, but we should have answers soon on Gaza Freedom Flotilla. Corporations represent psychopathy in structured form. Capitalism exists to make profit, period. Both serve the greed of unbridled patriarchy. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of philosophical, exterior to economic theory. There's a lot of philosophical theory about how capitalism itself just rewards sociopathic behavior. I grew up around finance capitalism. My father was an investment management banker with a boutique firm that went under in 2008 during the financial collapse. But yeah, I grew up in that world. The mantra was, it's not business. I'm sorry, it's business. It's not personal, or it's not personal. It's business. Well, when you destroy someone, you destroy their livelihood. Their kids can no longer afford to go to like the same school or anything. It's pretty personal. So like literally, these hedge fund managers are looking at Gaza, because I know I grew up around, but looking at Gaza, and they're like, this is terrible. This is absolutely horrific. But this is business. It's not personal. We have a fiduciary responsibility to turn a profit for our shareholders, to maximize profit for our shareholders. And there's nothing beyond that. That is the ideology that all these people have because they were conditioned, because a lot of them come from generational wealth, so they have been conditioned this way. And there's no unsticking them. You know, they'll say the platitudes. They may even be disturbed by what's happening, but they will not be able to consist in their life, in their livelihood, in their job, which is most of their identity, unless they're like, okay, Gaza 2035 project. Let's start RFP, request for proposal. Let's get on this thing before other hedge funds do. So yeah, it rewards inherently the entire system, rewards psychopathy. Absolutely. Hey, Greg, what's up with Antifa? They've been really quiet, it seems. Any thoughts on that? Antifa isn't a they. It's just anti-fascist action, and it can't be really infiltrated. I mean, we haven't seen any actions really happen right now. There's no leader. There's no central committee. It's just decentralized actors acting along ideological lines against fascism. So there's no way to get in touch with them. There's people I know who support Antifa who consider themselves Antifa, but yeah, there's no actual organization. So we might see some stuff. I don't know. Let's see. Let me see. What else we got? Minpred, do you agree with the statement that social democracy is the moderate wing of fascism? I'm getting tired of social democrats pushing reformism and pretending that the Dems can be pushed left. Really? I thought they were supposed to be pushed left when the firebrand AOC got elected. No, she's pushed right now because the system, she's now deeply embedded into the system. She no longer hears Congresswoman AOC. She hears Senator Cortez, Speaker of the House Cortez. No, she's become addicted and infatuated with her position in the machine. And, you know, they all hang out with each other. They all know each other. You know, they may, you know, attack each other on Twitter or whatever, but like behind closed doors, they really know how to express class consciousness, you know? Kimberly Guilfoyle, Trump's ambassador to Greece, who he just appointed as his MAGA ambassador to Greece, is the ex-wife of Gavin Newsom, who's going to be probably heading the Democratic ticket for presidency in 2028. And Gavin Newsom, it was reported by, I believe it was the Financial Times, is actively getting campaign advice from Kimberly Guilfoyle. So, social democracy. Different from democratic socialism. I still have problems with democratic socialism. I don't think it's far left enough, but that's just me. Social democracy is, yes, we can reform the Democratic Party, we can reform capitalism into something more equitable. The problem with that is you have to do it under the power structures controlled by the bourgeoisie or the elite. So the problem is they control the apparatus of state violence. They get to determine what kind of protest is acceptable, what kind of violence is good or bad, what kind of political action and discourse can be tolerated. So I don't know. Good luck reforming. Yeah, they mostly just sheepdog wannabe progressives, people who actually want change with false promises that they can. Their function really isn't. And whether or not they believe this or not, but their performative function is to block actually progressive movements from access to political power. Because they promise, hey, we have this established hierarchy, we have this established, structure that we can use to fight the fascists, which they don't use. But people see that and it's like, okay, it's already in place. Maybe we can work to reform it. instead of building an alternative power structure, which is scary, which is complicated, which actually will take a lot more people being on board with that idea. So instead, people get intimidated and they go to social democracy instead of more progressive politics. So, yeah. Hey, Greg, I'm an hour south of Palantir. Jewish Voice for Peace recently protested at their location downtown. Awesome. Let me just scan through some of these. We're out of time, but okay. Stop arguing about labels. Fascist gonna fascist, no matter what they call themselves. Haven't heard. Isn't imperialism fascistic? Oh yes. I like to envision fascism as imperialism turned in on itself. Because I was just talking about this a couple weeks ago. The same issues that we had in Afghanistan, that some military units were doing, are like the same thing ICE is doing right now. They were told, go hit targets, go find the Taliban, but they're like, we don't have any intelligence on where they might be. So they'll be like, all right, we'll come up with targets. So this was like with the same tactics, the same military equipment in Afghanistan. We're just doing it over here. So yeah, fascism basically looks like imperialism, but on our own home ground. And I just wanted to address this one thing. I meant corridors why BRICS cannot succeed. India is in the pocket of the USA. Russia sold a ton of oil to India in exchange of worthless rupees, one of the biggest Russian blunders. I don't know about that deal specifically, but I will say, as someone who loves India, who lived in India, that government's trash. And way too many people believe in the BJP and their Hindu fascist BS. And they are the weakest link in BRICS. And they're one of the biggest ways that we know that BRICS is burdened under the weight of like its contradictions. So India is the biggest problematic part of BRICS, in my opinion, as someone who has many Indian friends. Yeah, I actually might do an episode on India because that's actually a really important point. So, anyways, guys, sorry, this was kind of a schizophrenic episode, but we tried to do something new. Hope it was helpful to some people. May have not been. We're back to our standard format Thursday. Don't know what we're going to be talking about. The latest catastrophe, probably, with some people from the Mint Press staff. So hope to see you there. It's Monday. Welcome back to the salt mines. You got more work ahead of you this week. So cheers, y'all. Thanks for stopping by. And yeah, someone says India had a great past and will have a great future past Modi and Dudfa. Hopefully, we can only pray. All right, guys. See ya. Cheers.